Hello, my name is Matthew McArdle, and the book I chose to cover is The Great Influenza, Story of the Deadliest Pandemic in History by John M. Barry. So let's get started. The era and setting. The outbreak began in 1918 and in total would kill more than any other outbreak in the history of humans. The plague is the most popular disease, I would say. It's killed a greater portion of the world's population, though in raw numbers, the influenza virus killed much more. Approximately 50 million, but some estimates are as high as 100 million. And every American war has had more die from disease than from combat. And in this one half were young men and women, and it affected not only soldiers but Americans at home, in addition to France, Germany, and Great Britain. In the state of medicine at the time, Barry claims that this was the first collision between nature and modern science. Luckily, around 40 years before the outbreak, revolutionary science breakthroughs had given way to the theory of germs and disease. This subscribed to the belief that rather than believing that infection was something the body produced from within, scientists understood that illnesses were caused by intrusive biological means. And they did this by asking themselves, what can I know and how can I know it? The historical emphasis before this in the field of science was focused on reasoning out issues in one's mind, like one can do with physics or philosophy, but this was not applicable to biology because terminology is very important, and texts were constantly having to be referred to. The emergence of the virus, once again, it was in 1918. Researchers have traced the original taking off point to Haskell County, Kansas. Generally began with infection of army camps. The close quarters of the soldiers was definitely taken advantage of by the virus, and it was killed in one of two ways. People slowly stripping away the body of its natural defenses and allowing bacteria to invade the lungs, causing bacterial pneumonia, or quickly, indirectly, violent viral pneumonia so severe it feels as though the lungs are on fire. The warriors. These were the main doctors that were researching the disease at Hopkins University. William Henry Welch was the leader, gifted scholar throughout university, went to Germany to study further, and returned to America to teach at Hopkins. Arrived as germ theory was declared fact, and the field was diving into the unknown. And he also hired Franklin Mall, Flexner, and Rufus Cole, and these were all his right-hand men throughout the whole ordeal. So, as the disease began to spread, World War I had begun. President Wilson began to essentially censor press and ensure only patriotic messaging was what Americans were hearing. So, rather than question that, America crystallized around that and focused on the war. The Red Cross declared it would put all of its resources toward the war, full responsibility of supplying nurses, tens of thousands to the military. And with Wilson's approval, the Hopkins team began putting together an organization to study more war-focused medical ideas, focused mainly on epidemic diseases, what was hitting us everywhere hard at the time. Railroad cars were transformed into modern lab facilities, and a new serum was developed to prevent pneumonia, though not typically successful, it showed promise. World War outbreaks. It was spreading incredibly far, incredibly fast. The Hopkins group began to round up patients, tracing backwards the trail of the disease that had left through individuals acting as hosts. Boston was an awful place. Philadelphia served as a breeding ground. 2 hours after the admission of the hospital, patients would be taken over by an incredibly vicious form of pneumonia, and they could die within hours. The virus then began to move inland from the coast toward the Pacific, traveled up the Mississippi River to the central part of the nation, and Philadelphia was once again a breeding ground. The plan by the Hopkins team was to understand the epidemiology of the influenza, learn its pathology, what it did within the body, and needed to know what microorganism caused the influenza in order to stimulate the immune system and prevent and cure the disease. Rather than teams of scientists working night and day across the globe, having that succeed, nature intervened again and ended up ending it for us all, thankfully. Infectious pathogens emerged, effectively weakening and eventually killing the virus. This is not to say that human interaction with it did nothing to reduce its effects. It is plausible to say that as more cases came to hospitals and caretakers were more experienced with treating it, that nurses and doctors were able to catalyze this process as well. What lessons to take away in emergency management from this? The scenario was a learning experience for the entire world, and for the time I believe that the actions taken were satisfactory for what the world was facing and what was available at the time. This does not excuse the awful living conditions in the hospitals or the cesspool that the entire city of Philadelphia became, but the areas of government and its subsidiaries that were qualified to help with the scenario came through and supplied literally everything and anyone they could. And here are my sources. Thank you.